Now that you know the basics of the PHP language, it's time for us to start talking about how to integrate with databases. For this course, we're going to use a sample database that is structured to fit the construct of a movie rental store. This sample database is called the Sakilla database. Using parts of the Sakilla data, we'll learn how to communicate using PHP data objects, or PDO for short. PDO uses object-oriented methodology, such as classes, objects, methods, and properties, to read and write to the database, which makes interfacing to databases very clean and efficient. The table structure that we'll be working with is large and covers not just films, but also actors in those films, film categories, staff, customers, addresses, and even inventory. It's a great example database to use for testing and experimentation as you learn your way around databases. But for us, our main focus will be in the film table. Let's take a look at what is inside our film table.
If you open up the example workspace next to this video, you'll see that it starts off with 3 files, a database.db file, an index.php file, and a style sheet or style.css. Our database file is local to the workspace, so it's great for you to be able to play with and experiment and try out different things with the database. It's also SQLite instead of MySQL, so it's very lightweight. We'll be able to use most of the same query commands, especially for this particular lesson. So if we want to take a look at the database, we will here in a second through the console. But let's take a look at our index file and our style sheet. Well, really just the index file. You'll see it's just a standard HTML file with the extension of .php. There's actually no PHP code in it at the moment. It is giving us a title or a header saying the Sakilla sample database, then a list of films by title, and you'll see film 1 through 4. If you go over and hit preview, you can see the title starts off with Sakilla sample database, films by title, and then films 1 through 4 in an ordered list. These are just examples. We'll replace that with the code from our database by the end of this. So let's say we want to take a look at our database. I'm going to go ahead and open up the console by clicking on View and Show Console if it's not already visible. I don't really need the index file. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. Okay. So to go in here, our first command will be to open up the SQLite console. The way we're going to do that is by typing the command SQLite and then the number 3 for the version here. Hit enter, that's our console, and then we can always type dot and help. And that will give us a list of commands that we can use. We're going to use a command called .databases to show what databases are currently existing in the console. I'm going to hit Control and L to clear the screen, and then I'm going to hit .databases. Hit enter, and you'll see that it says name is main, and then there is no file currently attached. So we're going to want to open and attach that particular database file that's in our workspace. The way we're going to do that, so we can use the console, is to type the command .open, and then the file name, which I can just type DAT and hit Tab to complete it. Hit enter, and now when we run up through the history twice, we can see .databases again. Hit enter, and you'll see it's actually linking main to a file. I'm going to clear my screen again, and then type a new command, .tables, so .tables, and then hit enter, and you'll see that we have several tables. Now these tables are going to match up with what is in the Sakilla database example on their website. Let's use their website to look at the structure a little bit more. So I'm going to go over, start a new tab, and then go ahead and search for Sakilla database. All right, our first result would be the MySQL Sakilla database. And then we're going to look at structure, tables, and then the film table. So you'll see here the film table, if you scroll down, all of the columns that are available to you. So those columns that are available are film ID, title, description, release year, so on and so forth. If we go back to our index.php in the preview, you'll see that here it lists the films 1, 2, 3, and 4, so those would be the titles. So that's really what we need. And then we're going to want to be able to click on any 4 of these, and that then link off to a new page that shows the information to just 1 of the films. You can always reference the Sakilla sample database website, and I'll put the link in the notes. Okay, I don't need this anymore. I'm going to click that. I'm also going to go ahead and close this. And now that gives us a quick base of what our database structure looks like, what tables we're going to look at. We're really just going to concentrate on just the film table, and then all of the columns that we're going to be able to pull information from. Our next step is to connect to the database using PHP.
A PHP data object, or PDO, is an extension that allows us to have a consistent way of interfacing with databases, making our communication much easier from within our project. The first step in working with our data is to use a database-specific PDO driver.
Before we create our PDO and connect to our database, we should do a quick review of some object-oriented PHP. Since our PDO and all that it returns is in OOP form, our object, or our PDO, PHP data object, is an instance of the PDO class. That object, it will have its own variables called properties and its own built-in functions or methods. To start with, we're going to need to connect to our database using a PDO database driver. We'll be using SQLite for the following examples, so let's see what's needed for that database. So we'll do that by opening up a tab and doing a search for PDO drivers. Okay, and the first one is the one we want. And then we can see here we have several different PDO drivers. You'll see it says database extensions here at the top, abstraction layers, and PDO. If you end up on just the PDO main page, you can scroll down, and you'll see that at the very bottom, or pretty close to the bottom here, you'll see PDO drivers. So that's where we left off. So in PDO drivers, we're going to want SQLite. So we click SQLite and see what it requires. It says PDO SQLite driver that implements the PHP data objects interface, which we'll be working with, to enable access to SQLite 3 databases. In order to do that, we're going to need a certain string. Let's see here. We need a PDO DSN, okay? So we will need the data source name, or DSN, which is the prefix, which is going to be SQLite, and we can see more info here. And to access a database on disk, which is what we have, we would append the absolute path to the DSN prefix. Okay, so taking all that in, let's go make it work. Head back over to your workspaces. You can leave this open. I'm going to go ahead and close it. And now I'm going to go ahead and bring my console down. If it's still there, you can just tuck it away. Or if you want, you can do hide console. I'm going to open up my index.php file, scroll to the very top, and here I'm going to open up some standard PHP tags, and we'll add our connection code to start with here in the index file. Go ahead and close it. And inside here, we're going to want to do a couple of things. The very first thing that we're going to want to do is to enable our error reporting. And to do that, we're going to first add a comment. And that comment is going to remind us to get rid of this code before we put it in production, because we don't want to display errors to just any user. It's just for development purposes. So I'm going to say remove before flight. Okay, in the next line of code, we're going to call a built-in PHP function called ini_set. So ini_set. And then in here, we're going to have two different strings. The first string is what we want to set, which is display errors. And that is display underscore errors. And then we're going to put another string, which is whether we want it on or off. And in our case, we want it on. Close our line with a semicolon, and that's our very first step, that we have error reporting or displaying errors to our screen on. The next thing we're going to do is create our PDO object. We do that through object-oriented code by instantiating a new PDO object. So first, we give it a variable name to store the object in. So $, and I'll go with DB for database. The next is the keyword new to create a new object, and then our class, which is capital PDO, and then open and close parentheses and close our line. So inside of our PDO, the first thing that happens is we need a DSN. And for us, if we recall, it was SQLite followed by a colon, followed by the absolute path of the database on disk. So head back a couple, open up some strings, and then we're going to do SQLite, colon. In our case, it's in the same folder. So we're going to do // and then database .db. Okay, I'm going to save that, go down to the next line, and just to see that we've created our new object, we're going to do a var dump for the actual DB object that we created. So let's do that now. var underscore dump, open and close our parentheses, and then inside our object, $DB. Close our line with a semicolon, hit save. I'm going to go ahead and hit die after this. That will stop the actual rest of the file from loading, hit save, and then click on our preview icon. Okay, so here we are seeing it's dumping a object. It is a PDO object. If we were to maybe perhaps make a mistake, maybe a spelling error, so let's add a couple extra A's in here. Save our file, and then re-hit the icon, you might get this, which is a fatal error, uncaught exception, and then PDO exception. Well, we don't want uncaught exceptions. We don't want that accidentally happening. So the next thing for us to do is a little bit of error handling. But before we do the error handling, let me go ahead and fix my error. So I'm going to go in, close this, and remove some of these A's. Save, and then re-preview. All right, great. Now let's move on to some error handling.
Managing errors in any application is very important, especially when it comes to database errors. We will manage this by wrapping our code that communicates with the database within a try-catch block.
Continuing where we left off, we have created our PDO object successfully, and then I demonstrated how we can break that. So we're going to go ahead and break that again. So I'm going to add a few more A's back in and see how we can handle these errors and exceptions. Let's go ahead and refresh this. And now we'll see we have a fatal error, uncaught exception. Well, we don't want that to happen. And if you recall from object-oriented code practice, we have a lot of try-catch statements when we're trying to catch exceptions and handle errors. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to handle this PDO exception by catching any general exceptions in our script. So head back over to the index.php file. And in here, we're going to surround any connection to the database. So here where we're creating our new database, we're going to actually surround that in a try block. So try, and then open and close our curly braces. Then we have a catch. Open and close parens. And then open and close our curly braces. Now this is a try-catch block. Inside of here, we're going to try any code that we want to run. And if it fails out or has an exception, we want to catch that exception. So here we just simply put the class that we want to catch, which is a PDO exception, or we can use the parent class to catch any exception. So we'll type in exception with a capital E. And then the next argument is the actual exception object that gets thrown when the error happens. So that we'll just call it $E for exception. Now we want to take this code here on line 11. In fact, we'll do line 11, 12. We'll just copy it all, and we'll put it inside of our try block. So that way, anything inside of here will happen only if the successful database object is created. So the other half of this coin here, or the other side of this coin, is to actually put something in here for our exception when that happens. So right now, I'm just going to echo a string, and that string, let's say, sorry, the connection was not successful. Okay. And then I also don't want it to continue, so I'll add another die statement here. Close it with a semicolon, save our file, and I'm going to refresh. So instead of it throwing an uncaught exception, now it says, sorry, the connection was not successful. Much cleaner, much nicer, no weird dumps to the screen about our code. Exactly what we want. Now to make sure it works, we're going to go ahead and fix our error, and then go back in here, save our file, and then let's redo our preview. And now we have our PDO object. Before we continue on, we do want to do two more things to our try-catch block or to our PDO object and then our actual exception to make it a little bit more informative for us. So let's go ahead over to a new tab and let's open up the exception class. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So I'm just going to type in exception PHP, and here we have exception, which shows us the actual exception class. If you scroll down here, we'll see we have several different methods that we can use. The one that we're going to want is getMessage, which if we click on the getMessage information, it'll just say it gets the exception message and returns the exception message as a string. Head back over to your code. Here I'm going to modify line 11. I'm going to actually get rid of everything there, just do echo. I'm going to pass through the actual exception object, which is $E, and then an object operator. So that's a dash and a greater than symbol, looks like an arrow pointing to the right. And that is how we tell it that we want to run a method. The method that we're going to run is getMessage. So get, and then capital M, message. And remember, it is a method or also a function. So that means that to call a function, we need to use the open and close parentheses. So we'll go ahead and do that. And then close it, save, and now let's refresh and see what the difference is. Okay, connection successful. So I'm going to go in here, break it again. Save our file, then refresh. And so now it actually gives us an informative message more than just, sorry, I can't connect. It actually tells you SQL state, hey, we're unable to open the database file. All right, so that tells us if we can't open the file, maybe we did a mistake in our connection string, which now we know we did. So we'll go ahead and close that out and then hit save. Okay, the final step, the last thing that we want to do is a command on the actual PDO object itself, or a method on the PDO object itself. So we need to go ahead and open up a new tab to search for the actual PHP PDO object. So we'll do PDO class, then the PHP PDO class is in the manual. Okay, and if you scroll down here, you'll see that there are several different methods. The one that we're interested in is setAttribute. So we say setAttribute, and then in here, you'll see there are several constants or the actual attributes that you can change. That's here in the header. So you'll see attribute case and then attribute error mode. So attribute error mode or the error reporting is what we want to modify. So we want to, let's scroll down a little bit more here. We want to modify this so that the error mode, when that happens, anything that happens at all, instead of silencing them or just having a little warning, we actually want to set it to throw exception. So no matter what the error is, we're going to throw an exception. So let's go ahead and do that by calling setAttribute on our actual PDO object or the $DB. So head back over to our index.php file, and we'll do it directly underneath. Actually, we're going to get rid of this. We don't need this guy anymore. And then here, we're going to do $DB, object operator to setAttribute. All right, and then close that line with a semicolon. Now, if you go back to where we were in the manual, you'll see that we have the attribute and then the value. So our attribute that we're going to set, we're going to copy this constant here. We're going to paste that in. That's our first argument. Then we're going to add a comma, and our second argument is the mode that we want to set it to. And that would be PDO error mode exception. Copy that, paste it in, hit save, and then I'm going to do my preview just to make sure it's all good. Okay, we didn't do the var dump, so we wouldn't see anything different, but there's no errors, no exceptions, nothing dying out. It seems like we're right where we want to be. Let's go ahead and close this guy out and then go back and review here. So we've added a try-catch statement to make sure there are any exceptions that happen on the PDO connection string. We'll throw an error message to us and then die out the script. And then we also, after creating the new PDO object, we have set the error mode attribute of the PDO object or the DB object to throw all exceptions for any kind of error that happens. Next up, we want to run some queries and see what films are in our database.
Queries are one of the most used items out of all of the interfacing we'll want to do with our PDO object. Let's take a closer look at queries using PDO and what these queries will return to us.
The time has now come for us to query our database and get a set of films returned back to us directly from the database, and we'll store it into a variable. The way that we're going to do that is by running a method that is built into the PDO object. So let's take a look at the docs again for the PDO class. We'll just go up and open up a new tab, PDO, PHP, and the first one should be the PDO manual. That's good. This is the introduction, but we're just going to scroll down here and click directly on the PDO class. Okay, scroll down, take a look at the methods. The one that we're going to want is over here on the right, about 3/4 of the way down, called query. So it's a public. It will return a PDO statement, and it is query is the method name, and then the single argument is a string or the SQL statement that you want to run. If you click on the query link, it'll say just the same. It executes a SQL statement, returning a result set as a PDO statement object. So it's going to return to us a new object called a PDO statement. So let's start by coming over here and running our query on the DB object. So we can do that right here in our index.php file. Let's go ahead and clean up our file a little bit so that we only have the information that we need in that file. So for instance, on the index page, we're going to want this database connection, but we might want that connection on other pages as well. So we'll create a new file called database.php. And so let's do a new file, database.php. Open up that file, and we're going to actually copy the information from this first section. I'm actually just going to cut it all the way out. All right, save our index file, and I'm going to paste this in. So this is still setting our errors to on. We still want that for now. It's going to be our try-catch block. It's going to have a DB object here on line 7. And at the very end of this file, the DB object will still exist. The key here is that we want to include, or in our case called require this file to be present inside of the index.php file. So let's open up our PHP tags again. We'll close them out. And then we'll keep just the code specific to this index file in here. We'll do that by using the internal function require _once. And then require once needs a file name, which is for us going to be database.php. All right, close that out. And now we have required that the database file be there. The way we can make sure that it's requiring the file, that it's including the file inside of the index.php is to now var dump and die our actual DB object. So let's do that just as an example. $DB is our object or our PDO object, and then run the statement die, and that will stop the process. So we'll close this manual out, and we'll go here and hit our preview icon, and now you'll see that we are dumping and dying our PDO object. But this time, our database file is separately included or required into our index file. So now that we don't need this code any longer, I'm going to actually close it out, and we'll continue running our query from here at the index.php file. So let's remove lines 5 and 6. And then I'm going to create a new connection to the database, or rather a new method to the database called query. And we're going to do that by doing $DB and then the object operator to query. Open and close our parentheses and close it out with a semicolon. Now, if you recall from the documentation, it takes a single string. So in our case, our single string is going to be, for this particular page, select star from film. So we're taking and just grabbing everything. Not very efficient at the moment, but let's just for an example, we'll do select star film. Okay, now that is our query. Now, it returns to us an object. So we actually need to store this somewhere. So I'm going to call it results. All right, and then on the next line, let's dump it and see what the results object looks like. So we'll do var dump and then pass through results. Close it out and then die at the next statement or the next line. Save our file and then go back and hit preview again. So here we'll see our object, the PDO statement object, and then it says that there is one item in there, and that is the query string, which is select star from film. Now, that's great, but it's really not giving us a whole lot of information. So we're going to actually need to work with this result set more in detail. And we also need to manage our errors because let's say, for instance, our query string is wrong, and we just say like D from film, which would not be correct, and then we go back and refresh, we have an uncaught exception. And like we learned earlier, we don't want uncaught exceptions in our code. So we need to wrap this in a try-catch block. We'll do that next and work with the result set.
Now that we have successfully run a query, we need to take a closer look at what is returned to us by our query method. All of the return data comes back to us in the form of a PDO statement object.
Okay, continuing, we're going to get rid of this exception that we have here. Let's refresh. I've already fixed it in the file. So we'll refresh this. And we're back to our PDO statement object showing the query string. And we need to extract the results from this. We want to get all of our films out of our PDO statement object. And the first place I would say check is we go to our documentation and look up the PDO statement object. I'm just going to actually copy this and paste it and hit enter. And that will take us to the manual page for the PHP PDO statement. So here is our PDO statement class. This says it represents a prepared statement, and after it is executed, the associated result set. So that is what we're going to work with, is our associated result set. We're going to go on down and look at the methods, and the method that we're going to want here, let's say, could do fetch all. That sounds good, fetch everything. This says it returns an array containing all of the result set rows. So it's going to return to us an array, and it doesn't have any required arguments. So let's go ahead and run that method on our results object, which is an instance of the PDO statement object. Head back over to our code. We're going to go down here and we're going to work with this results set. So here I'm going to continue to var dump and then die our result set, but we want to use the fetch all method. Before we dig into our fetch all method and see what it's going to return to us, we want to get rid of that error or the possibility of an exception being thrown by the query being incorrect. The way we're going to do that is with wrapping it in a try-catch block. So we'll go ahead up here to line 4, come down a little bit, and wrap this in a try block. Try, no arguments. I'm going to tab this in. All right, close this guy out, and then open up catch. And we are still going to catch the exception class and pass it through to an object $e. Close it out, and in here the same thing as before. We're just going to echo out our exception object, which is $e, and the method that we're going to use is going to be the same as before, get message. Okay, pass that through just to make sure that our try-catch block is working. We'll again get rid of our correct statement and then refresh. And then now you'll see it says general error. That's saying it's our syntax error. That's exactly what we wanted to see. except we didn't want to see the rest of this, so we need to add a die statement to the end of this. Okay, so let's refresh again. There we go. Much better. It just kills it and gives us the actual error itself. That's exactly what we're looking for. All right, let's go back in and fix our statement here. Select. All right, save that. Double check that we're back to working, and we are. Great. Now, instead of just dumping the results, we're going to use that method that we looked at, which is fetch all. So object operator, fetch, capital A for fetch all, and then open and close parens with no arguments, and let's go see what it does. Hit refresh. All right, we have an array with 1,000 results. That's a lot, and it's really hard to look at right now. So let's put some pre-tags in here so we can see this a little bit better. Right before here, we'll go ahead and do echo, and then open up some tags for pre, close it out. I'm going to copy this line. I'm going to head down here and close out my pre-tag. Let's go back and see if that makes it look a little nicer. Much better. So looking at our result set here, again, we have 1,000 results, a lot of results. We definitely would want to paginate this in a production environment. But again, this is just for examples, not to be put into production. What do we have? We have each one of the films, it seems, and a lot of information that looks duplicate. Okay, so the only difference between them is the key. So you see we have a film ID, and that's equal to a string of 1. And then we have a numerically indexed 0, so the first index 0, with an ID of 1. Double checking, title, key of title, that's the Academy dinosaur, all right? And then index 1, which is a second key, and that's the same, title as well. So it looks like we have something indexed by column name and something indexed by a numeric index. So let's go back to our PDO statement, fetch all, look at the manual, and the first optional argument is the fetch style, which takes another argument called fetch argument. Okay, so let's look down here at fetch style. So it says that fetch style controls the contents of the returned array as documented in the fetch document. So let's go to fetch, see what that says. Okay, this is a result set, single row, fetch style parameters. Okay, so the default here, it says, is returns an array indexed by both column name and 0 indexed column number. That's what we have. That's our default. But the option to do just the associative array is our first argument here. Great, great. So that's PDO fetch ASOC or associative. So it returns an array indexed by column name as returned in your result set. Let's do that. So we want to set fetch style to PDO fetch ASOC. So I'm going to copy this here, and I'm going to pass that through in our code here in our fetch all statement. Right here is our first argument. I'm going to paste in that class constant, hit save. Let's go back to our code and refresh. Okay, still 1,000 results. That's right. That's exactly what we were looking for. And now all of them are indexed by column name. So there's no miscellaneous 0 through whatever for the keys. It's just an associative array for each film. That's awesome. So now we know that our result set is a set of films indexed by column name. So we should be able to build out our code a little bit. So next we'll do that by providing some links, work with these results, and create a little bit more of a website.
After successfully querying our database and taking a look at our PDO statement results object, we're still going to need to work with our results to get the properly formatted data to our users. Let's take a look at how to bend these results to our will.
Let's build out and work with our result set by making our index page of films link off to a single film, and then we can just query the database for just one film by using, say, the film ID. So we have 1,000 results. Let's go ahead and start by cleaning up our index file and listing out our films and populating the actual list with what we have here from our database. So switch back over to our index.php file. we don't need to do this inside of our try-catch. So I'm actually going to cut that out. So once we have our result set and we've run the query, we can actually just come down here and do what we need to do. I don't want to die anymore. I actually don't need our pre-tags any longer. Let's get rid of all those. And instead of dumping this out, I actually want to take my result set and store it to a variable. The variable here that makes sense to me is films, plural. Okay, so result set fetch all will store to a variable called films, and films will be that 1,000 item array from our result set or from our films database. So going down, we're going to use some standard PHP at the very bottom of this file. Here we have our ordered list. So let's go ahead and open up some for each after we open up our PHP tags. So we'll go ahead and open those now and get started. PHP. All right, I'm going to close those guys out. And then here we're going to do a for each. So for each, and then films as film. All right, we're going to open up and close our curly braces. And then here we're actually going to have one of these items. So I'm going to cut one from here and paste it in. All right, so in order to use this with our looping PHP code, we're going to need to modify this just a little bit. So we'll start by adding our echo statement, and then we'll surround this entire thing in single quotes for now. Okay, and all that will do is just echo the string as it is right now 1,000 times. Let's double check that that works as we expect. All right, yep, film one a lot of times. So we don't need that. Let's go back and make this echo statement do what we want. So we're going to use this same class lens, except we want to modify this spot right here where it says film one with our actual film title. So let's start by doing that. And we'll say use string concatenation with the dot symbol. And do $film. Okay. Actually, we got to put some single quotes here to stop the actual string. There we go. Film. So our column name will be title. So we'll open up some double quotes here and use title. Hit save. Okay, now let's go back and refresh and see if that gives us our film titles. And it does. So here is 1 through 1,000 of all of our films, but it doesn't go anywhere. So we actually need to link this off somewhere. So let's go back to our code and see how we're going to do this. So on the same line here as our actual list items, we're going to open up that anchor tag just after our little image or our little video icon. So we'll do an A and then href equals, and we'll use double quotes here, and then we'll say films. Let's call it films.php. Now that file doesn't exist yet, but it will. And then we're going to pass through a get variable, an argument here, and that's going to be called ID. We're going to set ID equal to, and we want to set it equal to something that's going to be unique for the database. And in our case, if we go back to the Sakilla manual, so we'll do Sakilla. Let's see, it's right here in our history. And then we're going to look at our film table. So in our film table, you'll see that the film ID is a surrogate primary key used to uniquely identify each film in the table. It's exactly what we're looking for. So we will use film_ID. And since the column names correspond to the key of the array, we should be able to use film_ID directly in our code. We'll do that by doing more string concatenation. So I'm going to break this string with single quotes, add more of our concatenation dots here, and then do $film. Okay, and then open up for an array index. And in here, we're going to use, let's see, film_ID. Let's save that, refresh our page, and see if it gives us what we expect. Well, they are all links. That's good. And so see now, if you look at the link in the status bar at the bottom, you should be able to see it says ID equal to, and then there is an array index or a film ID index equal to the ID. So that's good. So when we click on one of these guys, you'll see it's going to give us a 404 not found. So let's solve that now by creating the films.php. I don't need this anymore. Close it. And now in here, right-click, new file, films. Okay, blank file. Switch back over to your index.php file. I'm going to do a Command A here, select all, or you can do the drop-down edit and select all. And then I'm going to copy this and then paste it into my films.php file. Now, I don't need this same listing here, so actually I'm going to get rid of this ordered list altogether. Okay. And then here, it's not going to be films by title. It's actually going to be the film title itself. Let's just say film title. All right. And then it's going to say sample database. This is all fine. Scroll back up to the top. So I'm going to save this file and go back and refresh. And I shouldn't get the 404. You should get Sakilla sample database and the modification that we made, which is film title. It's not the actual film title, but we're going to replace that now by doing an extra query here. So instead of the 404, now you should see Sakilla sample database, same as before, but instead the small modification we made, which is film title. We want to populate this with the actual film title that uses the ID from the URL. Let's do that by modifying our query. Go back to films.php, and here, instead of select star from film, okay, I want to select star from film where, and then it's going to be film underscore ID equals, and then here we want to put the ID in. For now, we'll just manually put one in. We'll just say 201, hit save, and then we're going to have results, but our result is really, it's going to be one result that we need, not a fetch all. Here, we're going to use a different method, very similar. We're just going to get rid of the all, so it just says fetch. And instead of films, we're going to move this to be just one film. So from here, the next thing we need to do is modify our code at the bottom of this page. And instead of saying film title, we're actually going to open up our PHP tags and do echo and then $film, so singular, and then title. Close that line and close our statement. Okay, let's save our file, and then we'll go back up here, and I will reopen the preview window. And that's going to give us our main file, but then when we click on an actual film, you'll see it'll go use the film ID, except we're not injecting the film ID into our query. We're just saying film 201, which is Cyclone family. Let's say we'll do a different film just for now. Scroll up here and say 501. Hit save, head back over, and refresh our preview. Okay, that works for us. Now, the last thing we want to do is actually use the number from our get variable. So we'll go in here, right here on line 4, and we'll check to make sure that the get var is actually present, if it's actually set. We'll do that by opening up a conditional statement, which is an if statement here. And we're going to say if $_GET for our get. And we're checking to see if the get var of ID is actually there. And we're going to see if it's not just present, we want to see that it's not empty. So not empty, using the empty keyword or empty method. All right, and then we're going to open our curly braces. And if it's not empty, meaning the ID is actually present, we want to set it and do something with it. So we'll say if that it is not empty, we're going to say film ID, so setting a variable called film ID, and we'll set it equal to this exact string up here, which is our get var. Let's clean that up a little bit. Close it out with a semicolon, and then now we can simply concatenate the ID directly onto the end of this. Save our file, and let's switch back over to our preview and see if this works as expected. So here's ID number 1. We'll hit refresh Academy Dinosaur. Let's go back to our page Scroll down a little ways here. Here is Tadpole Park 874. So we'll click on this. It says film ID is equal to 874, and our title does show Tadpole Park. All right, so just as a quick review, we now have index.php. The index.php file is running a query to fetch all the results from the film table. And then we're going to create links using our anchor tags and a looping construct of for each. And then we are echoing out the film title, creating a link to film.php or films.php, which we have created that file. And then we're doing a new query in there to select all of the films where the film ID is equal to the getVar of the film ID. All right, up next, we talk about something very, very important, security and SQL injection. Go back to our films.php file, and then how can we tidy this up? Well, we're doing a try catch here. That's good. But what we're not checking is that what do we do if the ID is not set? And then if it's not set, why would we want to run this code here? So actually, let's just get rid of all of this code that's in here and put it inside of our if statement. We actually want to grab all the way through to line 19 because there's certainly no point of us doing this if we don't have it. So we'll go ahead and hit paste in here to drop it in, and I'm going to do a quick tidy up. Okay, so at this point right now, if we look at this code, it says if we have an ID, if it's there, it's not empty, then we'll go ahead and set our film ID, make sure it's an integer value, and then we'll run a query on our database by going through the prepare statement, the bind parameter statement, execute, so on and so forth. But what we're concerned with is if nothing is returned, if it doesn't actually have anything in it whatsoever, or if the ID is empty. So if the ID is not set, then we don't want to run the code. So that's what this is covering. But now we want to make sure if we don't actually have a film. So let's go down here to the bottom and see that if we don't have a film, it's not going to echo any kind of title back to us. So let's put an if statement down here to test whether or not the film has anything in it. Let's do that by making this PHP tag a little more encompassing. We'll actually get rid of the H2 on either side of it, and then bring it down a few lines so we can just concentrate on the code. Okay, so now here at the bottom of our file, we're going to echo film title. Well, we want to make sure that there actually is a film title. So if there isn't a film title or there's no film at all, then we want to return a message that says, sorry, no film could be found with the specified ID. The way we can do that is to just check if the film object itself or the film variable is set. It actually has something in it. We can do that with the isSet function of PHP. So if actually we type in PHP is set, which is all one word. Here's the manual on php.net. And then we're looking to see if a variable is set and not null, or basically not empty. All right, so we'll close that out, and then we'll go back to our films, and then we'll say if, open up our parens, and then open up our curly braces. We'll close out our curly braces, and then what are we testing? We're testing that is set, open and close parens again, and then do $film. Okay, so we want to make sure that it's actually set and it's going to return something to us. If it's empty, we want to do something else. Let's make sure that it's working before we test our actual error case. So here, we'll go back and do number 9 again, hit enter. Okay, that's working. It's still returning it to us, but now it's this normal text. That's because we lost our H2 that was here before. Well, we're going to want the H2 for the film title or our statement that says we can't find a film. So I'm going to put that outside here. Okay, make sure we close it out after our PHP tags are closed. All right, there's our H2. Save it. Let's refresh our page here. Okay, much better. That's back to the H2 that we were expecting. And now we'll do our else statement. So else, what do we want to do? We want to return some kind of a message that says, sorry, it cannot be found. So we'll do an echo, add our quotes, close it out with a semicolon, and then whatever we want to return to our user in the H2. So we'll say, sorry, comma, no film was found with the provided ID. Yeah, that's good enough for now. All right, let's save that and refresh our page. Okay, still works, but if we go with a number that's outside of this, it's still not returning what we need. Okay. So film must be set. So where are we going to need to modify our code? Let's see what film looks like here. If we go up to line 16, clearly film is set after our results test is run. All right, so we'll go here and let's just do a var underscore dump. Some rudimentary debugging here for you. $film. Hit the semicolon, save it, and go back up and hit refresh. Okay, it's returning to us a Boolean false. Okay, so false is technically set. It's a Boolean. It's not considered empty. So the is set will not work for us. So that code really isn't what we want. Okay, so let's switch back over to our code. We don't need this if statement down here for this particular instance. We'll just leave it in. We're going to need an if-else statement, I'm sure, later, but we're not going to need this particular message. So I'll just remove the else for now and leave this in place. And then we'll go up here, and this is where we're going to want to test whether or not film is what we expect. So right here under line 16, we'll create a new line, and we're going to do another test or another conditional. Now, the conditional that we're testing here is that we've taken the ID, we've passed it through, we've requested it from the database. It's returning to us a false because nothing was found. We want to test to see whether or not film is false, so we can return a message. So we'll do if, and then we'll do $film equals capital false here for our keyword. Okay. And then if it is false, then we want to return a message that says the film could not be found. Now, we can do that by actually using the code that already exists here. It's in an H2, it's film title, so we can just set our film title if we want, or we could return a message and die. Let's just return a message and then kill the process for now. So we will echo, and then we're going to use what we previously put down there before. So sorry, a film could not be found with the provided ID. All right, now let's see if this works as we expect. So we'll go back over to our page here after saving, and we'll hit refresh. It says, sorry, a film could not be found with the provided ID. That's good, except we want to kill the process at the end by typing die. Okay, so we'll hit refresh on this. And now it says, sorry, a film could not be found with the provided ID. And then we go back here and hit number 9 like we had before. And now we're back to Alabama Devil, which is ID 9. Okay, so just as a review here, we have gone through, we've got our binded and prepared parameters. We execute our statement, and then we go down here and make sure that the film is actually there, if something actually exists. And if it doesn't, then we return a message, kill the process. We could definitely do more there, a little bit more user interface friendly error messages. But for now, this is great as an example for you. Now, the workspace here that's set up for you has the database. It has all these tables. Just as an example here, we'll do one last little thing. Instead of it saying if is set film, I just want to change the code just here for a second. And instead of echoing it out, I'll actually continue to echo it out. But afterwards, I'm going to do a print underscore R and pass through the actual film object or the film array variable. Let's save this and go back and hit refresh. Okay, if you see here, we have our array film ID. the description, all the information about the film, where really we're only needing the film ID. So something I say that I would do to continue learning on this would be to take what's existing now and build a little something out. Maybe run your query so it's just getting the title and maybe just the ID or just a few other small items instead of everything about the film. Perhaps on our main page, on our index page, instead of doing everything here and listing 1,000 of them, maybe try to build in some pagination. Do, 10 per page or 20 per page. Feel free to play around with it. The workspace is yours to use and enjoy. I hope you've enjoyed the course.
Now you have a good base understanding of how to work with a database in PHP using PHP data objects. Practice is very important to learning more about how we work with databases and what else is possible with PDO. That said, I would suggest you take a look at the notes for this course and read all the documentation thoroughly. Take some time to use workspaces and practice with the example database, and perhaps look at some open source PHP projects to see how they handle working with databases. The next logical step after understanding how PDO works is to look into further database abstraction with ORMs or object relational mappers, such as Doctrine, which you can find at doctrine-project.org. See you next time, and remember to work hard and have a little joy. Security is very important when we start working with databases. Most all databases contain information that could be considered sensitive or private. We would not want to open up ourselves to attacks from the outside or accidental dumps of this private information. Let's see how these attacks could affect us.
SQL injection is a common method that is used to attack data-driven websites and web applications by appending malicious SQL statements for the attacker's purposes, taking our customers' hard-earned data and dumping it to the screen simply because we did not take the time to filter all of our input and escape all of our output. One form of this attack would be to simply end the previous statement in the URL and append our malicious query to suit our purposes. The code we've written, it works. It does what we want it to do. It takes the ID and it produces an actual film for us, so I can type in 555, and it is Mall Rats United. Must have been a good film. I don't remember seeing it. Either way, this is terribly insecure, unvalidated code. You never want this in production as it sits right now. You are definitely primed to, one, having some nasty errors like, people typing in whatever, and it's just, dumping our exceptions, but we don't want that. We want to make sure our ID is a number for sure. And the other thing we want to make sure is that no one can do SQL injection, which is in essence stopping this statement here, because we're just taking our ID, whatever it is, whatever this variable is, with no validation, no verification, and just creating a variable. Then we're taking that variable and just dumping it right into our database as a query. So they could technically just attach whatever code they wanted to the end of it, and it'll get executed on our database, and that's a big no-no. Just to show you as an example, to just drive this home, instead of just the ID, which is 555, I can actually get rid of this and paste in a little bit of code, hit enter, and I've basically told the database that I'd rather it return the SQLite version to me instead of the actual title of the film. And as you can see here, there's our SQLite version, 3.8.2. That's not good. They can do anything they want. Well, almost anything, but it's still bad news. Let's not do this. Let's fix this by first validating that what we're getting through is an actual integer, or making it an integer. And we'll also take some built-in methods to the PDO class, PDO object, and use that to filter our results and to make sure it's secure. We're going to prepare our statements before we execute them. We'll do that next.
So the key here is to never, ever, ever trust user input. One of the great idioms of web security is filter input, escape output. And we'll do just that by using some very helpful PDO methods. Let's take a look at how we can use the prepare and binding to filter our input.
Now we should know not to trust user input. So we're going to need to do a lot here, but filter, filter. Let's get rid of all of this because it's ugly. We'll do back to our ID 555, which is Mallrats United. Okay, so first step here is to make sure that this is an integer. Now we're not going to really do any crazy validation on this. We're just going to force this to be an integer because we're expecting an ID. So I'll actually use the built-in function int_val, and then we'll do, let's see, val, and then open and close our parents here. Save that, and now whatever we type in here, if we do 555, whatever, and then hit enter, we'll actually get just the integers, the first section of it. So that's 55, I believe. Let's get rid of that. And yes, that's correct, 55. If I was to say ADDD and then another 5, again, it's just taking the first bit. So gets rid of all of the string characters there. We'll get rid of all of those. And then just go back to our 555. Okay, Mallrats United. Now that we've done that little bit of forcing it to an integer by using the int_val function, the next step is we want to actually use what's built into the PDO object or to the PDO class to tidy up SQL injection by preparing our statements. So let's go over here and we'll do a search for the PDO class again. All right, first one, class PDO. I'm going to scroll down here, and we have 2 or 3 things that we need to look into. The first one is prepare. Let's look at the docs for PDO prepare. Now, this method prepares a statement for execution and returns a statement object. So looking a little bit further here, we can see that the argument that it receives that is required is the statement. If you read the first paragraph, it says that it's going to be prepared to executed by the execute method. Okay, so that's our next method that we're going to call. So this is going to help us with the SQL injection by making sure that only the statement we want to run gets run. So anything tagged onto the end of it will not work. So we'll do a prepare statement first by putting our statement inside of it. So let's do that by going over to our code. And we are going to replace what's down here on the DB query with DB prepare. Okay. Now the only caveat here is that now we have a film ID that we want to pass through. So we're not going to be able to do that here. What we're going to use is a placeholder, and that placeholder is a question mark. So we need to get the film ID from line 6 down here to this placeholder that's on line 11 before we run our execute command. We're going to do that by using another method, and then finally on line 13, we'll actually run our execute. I'm going to go ahead and type the execute statement in now. If we go back up to the manual, we click on execute, you'll see that it only needs input parameters if we want them. But for right now, we're not going to use them. So we'll go back here. All right, we'll do that by calling the results object, or LTS, object operator to execute. Okay, now going back to the docs for execute, if we click on it, you'll see that it says execute the prepared statement. If the prepared statement included parameter markers, you must either call bind param or pass an array. Well, so we're not going to pass an array. We're going to actually use bind param or bind value. We can use either one. So let's click on bind param and take a look at that. It binds a parameter to the specified variable name, and it's got 2 arguments here that are required. The first is the parameter, which is a mixed type, and the second is a variable. We already know what our variable is going to be, which is going to be our film ID that we retrieved from the URL. But what is the mixed parameter here? So if we look at parameter, it says that the parameter identifier for a prepared statement using named placeholders, it'll be the name, or if it's using question mark placeholders, it'll be the one indexed position. Okay, so like arrays are 0-based, we want a 1-based index because we're using the question mark placeholder. So we'll actually use the bind param method. We'll do $results, and then object operator to bind, and then capital P and param. Right? And we'll open and close our parents. Now, we know that the first argument is supposed to be a one-indexed number that represents the placement of the question mark in our prepared statement. We only have one question mark, and it's one indexed, so the number 1. Then a comma to separate the arguments, and then our variable that we want to bind to that question mark. So in our case, it's $film_ID, which we set on line 6. So just as a review, we are getting the result set and putting it into a prepared statement. We're using a placeholder of question mark. Then we're binding that question mark or that parameter to our film ID, which comes from our URL on line 6. Then finally, we run the execute command on line 13, or the execute method, which will actually create our results object that has everything in it. Now, when we run execute, does execute return something to us? So let's go up here and take a look back one to our execute. It's going to return to us a Boolean, which is a true on success or a false on failure. Okay, we can test for that for sure, but for now, we just know that it's returning our result set to the actual results object. So we should still be able to use the code that exists on line 19, as well as our code that exists on the bottom here on line 39. So make sure our file is saved, and then click our preview icon. Okay, so now we have our films by title, just like before. This is the index.php file. I'm going to click on number 9 here, Alabama Devil. And then it'll say films by ID equal to 9 Alabama Devil. But we should not be able to paste in our SQL injection code here. We should just be able to enter in numbers and get the ID that we expect. So we'll go back one, Alabama Devil ID 9. I'm going to take the actual code that was the SQL injection from before, and then I'm going to take that and paste it back in to see what result we get now. Paste this in, hit enter, and then now it's returning nothing to us. Well, that's fine because it's not giving us a valid ID, but it's also not dumping back, which is exactly right. So if I was to enter in something that doesn't exist, say 1,000 or 10,001 will work, hit enter, it still returns nothing. So let's clean that up a little bit, and that should get us to where we want to be for right now.